Now, let me ask you guys, honestly, when it comes to Throne and Liberty, or give me new gen MMOs, not old MMOs, new gen MMOs. I would love for you guys to tell me, new gen MMO wise, which game is better than Throne and Liberty. Like, I hate on Throne and Liberty all the time, but let's just be honest for a second. New gen MMOs, which game is better than Throne and Liberty? Let me know in the comments. Because New World is gone, Lost Ark is heavy pay to win, all Ash of Cremation is GG'd. There's no new gen MMOs, in my opinion, that is better than Throne Liberty. Doesn't mean Throne Liberty is good, but if you compare to new gen MMOs, Nurslayer has made a video on Throne and Liberty talking about the unalive of a game, Throne and Liberty. Yeah, so that basically means that he thinks that the game is GG. Now, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on this. I played the game. I know the current state that it's in. I can give you more lore accurate news to what he's talking about. So let's just jump into the video and see, is Throne Liberty GG'd? Or does it have a chance to come back? All right, let's check this out. The GG of a game, Throne Liberty. Check out his channel in the description below.
NCSoft. That's one of the titans of our virtual world, massive multiplayer or online RPG.
NCSoft. Unfortunately, it is the titan of our open world MMORPG world because they are the only one producing MMOs. However, they are an Eastern company, which means that games unfortunately end up being heavy monetized. And we haven't been getting any Western MMOs. And if we do get any, they end up like ashes of cremation.
Industry. Most likely, the biggest we have in the entire space hailing from the East and South Korea. NCSoft made their name off of the earliness and subsequent superstardom of one of their first titles, Lineage, which as of 2025 has grossed nearly 10 billion USD in revenue, being one of the highest grossing games of
They did make hella money. Do you guys know that Throne Liberty was supposed to be called Lineage?
all time. Not something
Fun
we can
fact.
typically brag about in our more niche industry here, up there with the likes of World of Warcraft of the West, or perhaps more. Unlike Blizzard in the West, speaking of which, however, NCSoft wouldn't only rest on their laurels, as they would make subsequent Lineage titles including mobile spin-offs and remasters that would prove to be widely successful even today.
I mean, NCSoft has been making hella money off mobile. Just using the name of their IP, Aeon, Lineage, what they made so much money. It's absolutely disgusting because mobile, they can allow the game to be heavily monetized and people pay for it. So they do know that's where the money is at. Aeon 2 that is coming out is going to be mobile. It's out in Korea and it makes hella money.
But few might know of a third game that was planned in the series, an official sequel, actually, to the first game, quite a long time ago as well. That's because this title would later morph into what we know in present time as NCSoft's Throne and Liberty, set to wow the world being a AAA MMORPG in the 2020s. Throne and Liberty would first launch in Korea in 2023 before waiting nearly a year to launch in the West, which they did in October of 2024 as a free-to-play MMORPG.
It did launch. However, before the launch, if you guys don't know, another fun fact was that this game looked absolutely horrible. It was extremely mobile-y, static combat, bad movement, extreme autoplay, but they changed all that because of the negative feedback they got from the West.
Despite having a reported budget of over 100 million USD and a lengthy development cycle of nearly a decade, well, and being free, Throne and Liberty would lose 96% of its population less than a year after launch. Considering the stature and who this was coming from, NCSoft, one of the titans of our industry, had many people wondering, why? Why did...
Now, I like to make some clickbait videos too, but let's be real. When a new MMO launches, you can't compare the peak number to the player number that is now. I mean, let's see MMOs in general. We had New World that had like 1 million peak on launch. You had Lost Ark had insane amount at launch. I think they only had 300k at launch. You wait for it to bounce out, but the bounce out part of Throne Liberty was around 50k, but it still lost a lot of its population. Yes.
Did Throne and Liberty fail to garner an audience in both the East and West, and what were the largest contributing factors to its failures? Luckily, that's exactly what we investigate on the Death of a Game series, which is what this is, utilizing a timeline of events filled with bits of evidence, developer testimonies, and more clues to uncover the mystery behind why Throne and Liberty was unable to maintain its initially large audience. Detectives, we have a case to crack for Throne and Liberty, or something like that.
All right, let's see it. Now, fun fact, Throne Liberty actually was ranked top, I think 30 of revenue made on Steam, which is pretty crazy for the amount of players that it has. So that, in my opinion, is more disgusting. Like, you are making that much money off of almost such a low player base is insane.
The story begins far back, further back than you might be imagining even. That's not because NCSoft is ancient, and they are, being founded back in 1997, but because the story of Throne and Liberty actually begins back in November of 2011, with the announcement of a new Lineage title dubbed Lineage Eternal. Lineage Eternal, and this might sound confusing, was actually a true sequel to the original Lineage, and if you're confused, that's fine because a second Lineage already came out, but technically under a different denomination and was styled differently as a game, being 3D and allowing for first and third person play.
Now, the problem with games in general using the same name as IP is there's a huge problem with this because you expect the same type of game, but they just use the name because of the marketing and the hype around it, and they just release a whole different game. Like Aeon 2 is a perfect example, Lineage is a perfect example. Like you expect the same game, you get into it because of the hype of it, but it's not the same game, but it has some small things where you can tell that it is the same IP, but they just like to use the name for extreme hype because it makes hella money.
Lineage Eternal, on the other hand, was a top-down 3D game just like the original was. We can see it first showcased at G-Star 2014, where it had a striking semblance to what would later become known as Lost Ark from Smilegate, another Korean developer. Lineage Eternal looked good though, considering how little ARPGs existed in a modern context in the West and East, besides the big ones like
Lineage was really good.
Diablo, of course. This
when
game
it did
version
relaunch.
was actually designed utilizing the Guild Wars engine, which might surprise many watching. I think it looks and plays quite nicely from the small clips that were showcased. But the closed beta for the game would be reportedly delayed for a number of years before finally becoming a thing like 2 years later in November of 2016. Following the testing, NCSoft would receive enough feedback that would make them start to question their intention with Lineage Eternal altogether. They would go as far to change the leadership of their project altogether, bringing in a largely new, unknown leadership and moving from Guild Wars' proprietary engine to the Unreal Engine 4, likely.
They did the same with Throne and Liberty too. They did take a whole 180 when it came to like the whole mobile aspect of it. So NCSoft is known to do like full 180s when it comes to the project, depending on feedbacks.
Opening up their accessibility in the process for their hiring too. Lineage Eternal would never come to light, sadly. Officially, Lineage Eternal would become something else, dubbed
Project TL, Throne and Liberty.
Project TL, November 2017, just a year later. For me, this signified major changes, not just a change of name. With the Lineage name no longer involved, this was not set to be their biggest game launch in the coming history, as that would probably be reserved to the new major Lineage title that they would ever drop if they ever do drop one, as it was their flagship series. And second, that now an entirely new IP had to be crafted, and that was not something historically NCSoft did very well or had a whole lot of respect for, especially in the West. Project TL not so secret once you figure out what the end result is, Throne and Liberty, but it was an entirely new project effectively, extending the development duration and budget for the game. Project TL would become Throne and Liberty years later in February 2022.
This game has had so many different directions. It's just crazy. Like they did 180s on 180s to 180. At once it looked like a dungeon crawler, then they changed it to more of a mobile game, then they changed it again. Like, it's crazy.
According to producer Ong Jong-ok, Throne and Liberty would reflect the game's departure from Lineage and open up a new book on what was possible for new MMORPGs, gameplay, and possibilities. But the interview for me was a tepid one. It seemed like they were just merely acknowledging, hey guys, this isn't Lineage. Cool. Well, what was it? Was it ever going to be able to fully formulate its own identity too? Gameplay would be revealed in the spring of 2022, as well as more details concerning what was possible in the game. TNL featured high-fidelity graphics and a fast-paced action.
Like you can see by this was the early footage that it was completely static combat back in the day. You couldn't move while attacking, the UI was super outdated.
Centric combat system and allowed for
Like, look at these skills, bro. What is this?
interesting vehicle or minion play, at least that's what we could see from the early trailers. They even had things like a grapple hook to traverse the environment, large-scale PvP, boss battles, and in many ways was kind of looking like an Eastern version of Guild Wars. And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, since it was bound to be more focused on some different things like vertical power progression in the form of gear, which Guild Wars wasn't focused on, so it had some hooks or fangs there. But it still could be its own great project too, but that was going to be a tougher task to ask, of course. The big info reveal, however, would happen later that same year, in September of 2022. Here we would meet the game's main design director, Moonswap Lee, who I can't literally find anything about, including if he was ever even involved in Lineage or any of the other major projects at NCSoft, but we're going to circle back on that later. Moon seemed to like the stress about the combat being a major feature in TNL, and how the weapons
Look how bad the combat looked though at the first, like, early on.
Would dictate how a player would play their class, so to say, instead of an actual class.
It's literally full static. You cannot move while attacking.
design. This meant they were tying the skills to the weapons themselves instead, kind of like Guild Wars 2, except it was worse because it would actually dictate your class as well, while Guild Wars 2 has a bunch of different classes that are able to use a bunch of different weapons. But this system is done in a ton of other games like ESO and so on and so forth. I find it really boring and unimaginative, since it's so hard to tie a class identity and thus lore and story and roleplay ability, which...
Honestly, I know a lot of people don't like it. They don't like being able to swap classes or weapons, but I do think Throne Liberty did it pretty okay. Because I played the same tank from day one. I had some switches to like different type of tanks, but mainly I've been playing SNSGS. So you do find your identity with the class. But the problem is how hard it is to swap between the classes. Like if you have a game where you feel like you should be able to swap classes, it shouldn't be that difficult. It shouldn't be tied to your weapon level, your gear, stronger weapons, all this small stuff, your skill levels, everything. It is so difficult to swap, and only the big players or the big whales can actually swap between classes seamlessly, right? So that is, I think, one of the weakest points when it comes to the game. You have a weapon swap option, but you cannot swap weapons as you feel like.
helps you, as a player have an identity to just a weapon. But Guild Wars are called out in the Korean press release, a major part of Lineage 1 too, so it's not just biting Guild Wars, to be fair. How they were going about it though seemed to be kind of like a mixture of the two, Lineage and Guild Wars. Moon and On would promise there was a nice mixture of content in the game, and that liberty in the game's name stood for the liberty to choose to play the game how you saw fit, which was a cool and lofty idea,
Not
but could
really.
also become a poisonous promise if not delivered upon. Instead, the throne part of the name, which stood for those climbing for power, could be all that there was. Throne and Liberty would be announced to the West and the rest of the world, really, June 2023. It's here we are, for the first time, conscious of NCSoft's intention on bringing the game to the Western market. Spark notes for those
This was
unaware,
horror.
why I'm
This
even
was really
mentioning that as a
bad, by the
particular
way,
point
when they
is
first
because
announced
many
it.
high-profile Korean titles never even come to the West, and the ones that do take sometimes years to transition. This creates a number of problems, mostly recycled content, little deviation from live even if it's in a different market, and delays in content and accessibility. NCSoft has globally launched titles before too, like with Ion, but
What is really cool about Throne Liberty, though, is like he said, it's very rare that titles even come to the West. And when they do, we're already very far behind. But the global version actually was more successful in the Korean, so we are actually fully caught up to the Korean version, and they are actually focusing on a lot of feedback from global because that's where they make most of their money right now. So it's very unique from usual Korean launches because, like when Aeon, for example, comes out, we're going to be far behind on the content on Aeon. It's going to be extremely pay to win and monetized, while they actually lowered the pay to win because of AGS with this game, which they don't actually usually do. So overall, it was a very different launch when it comes to most Eastern
typically
MMOs.
hasn't done such a thing. While NCSoft has self-published in the West in the past, these days their operations there are much more scaled down after an inability to penetrate said global market. As such, they were looking for a publisher in that market to help them reach the success there. So I'm not entirely sure why
Amazon.
they ended up picking who they picked, Amazon Game Studios. We just covered them like a couple weeks ago, and we have covered them multiple times in the past.
Amazon Game Studios did not age well, but they're doing okay for now. I mean, at least they're communicating very well, but they're not. The thing is, Amazon Game Studios, especially the people that are working on Throne Liberty right now, for the people that don't know, are very active in their social media, talking to content creators, making YouTube videos, doing every month weekly talks. So they are very active. However, the bad part is, even though they're very active and they're trying to be, they don't do any changes to the game which they promise in their talks. So yeah, it's very cool to see that they're so active making videos, making promises, but they don't deliver on the promises, and a lot of the development take several months. So it's kind of weird. It feels like Amazon is really trying to keep the community together, but they're just not getting the help from the devs, which is Smilegate
Past
Studios.
as a relatively new publisher, and, well, developer as well. They seem to be completely out of touch. This pick for me, when I saw it happen live, was a super red flag. What it told me was they didn't want to manage the game there, not just because it was hard, but because they likely wouldn't be making that much money from the amount of effort put in without having a localization publisher. It also told me they weren't really doing their research. But the issue with this sort of thing is merely that, well, who you choose, some developers or publishers in this case, can make some proper changes that end up making a difference. But if you end up choosing a bad one for the job of localization, monetization or globalization, one who just chooses it like a cash farm operation where you just translate, whatever language it comes from, well, you pay for what you get. And to be fair, a localization developer or publisher can't outright fix a game anyway. They can merely just steer it in a better direction and better explain it by translating it properly. For example,
Now, here, I got to make a point. Amazon Game Studios, even with all the bad stuff they do, they are really good at two things. One was, of course, making the monetization and pay to win less, which was really good. And the second thing is they're really good at marketing, getting huge player numbers. Aside from that, not really good, but they could have had way worse publishers. There's many publishers out there that make the game extremely pay to win, which Throne Liberty could have been. Right now, I would say Throne Liberty pay to win level is around 5, 6 out of 10. But if it wanted to go with the Korean monetization, it would have been a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 for sure.
Example, making some parts of the game easier or more accessible based on the amount of grinding needed or something like that depending on the region. But after their showcasing, something would stick out like a sore thumb in their gameplay presentation. And that was this unnerving feeling that the game seemed to feature an autoplay system and was made for mobile. This is a game feature that is famous or infamous depending on your opinion.
This was huge drama. I remember this. This was crazy. They promised a big MMO, and then this is again what I talked about earlier. They did a full 180. They went away from all of this because of the feedback that they got from the West. Because it did fail in Korea, so they wanted to do it really good release for the West, and they actually listened to a lot of feedback from the West. I think Koreans were actually complaining about this too. Now, the funny thing is, NCSoft is launching Aeon, but that one is full mobile. So they were like, okay, we'll listen to the community feedback. It didn't go so well with Throne Liberty. So next time we're going to launch Aeon, we're not going to listen to the community. We're going to just make it extremely pay to win and mobile.
In our viewpoint in mobile online RPG gaming.
I'm guessing they're sitting there and they regret listening to the community and changing the game. Because they're like, oh my god, if we just follow, because they're making hella money on Aeon. It's so bad. I played it in Korea. Game is so bad, but they're making so much money, and they could have done the same with Throne Liberty.
NCSoft had been dabbling in and making bank on for the past decade already, including with their flagship series, Lineage. Autoplay was stinky, even if people liked it, and didn't really have a place in PC MMORPGs. Reason being, it means the gameplay has to be compromised for it to be that way in some sense. Even more so if the game is also being made for console, which in this case it also was. This means that the combat in the game is easy enough and non-interactive enough to be, able to be played automatically, which is not a good look, especially for the next best thing from NCSoft, or whatever. On Jong-uk's reception to people's feedback, though, seemed positive. They were open to changes, and even significant ones like removing the auto combat altogether, which they did. But the damage was already kind of done. The game clearly had been made for that in mind, which is why there was only 11 abilities, which meant players were getting a different game than they might have originally imagined.
But the 11 abilities is not bad, though. I don't know why people want a skill bar of 20, 30 abilities, which you end up macroing anyways. I think a good clean spot is 12 abilities, which is good. You don't need to overcomplicate things. 12 ability is good for both PvP and PvE. It depends. And Throne Liberty systems inside, even though the class balancing is just horrendous, they do have a very in-depth system when it comes to stats, gear, classes, everything. Way more in-depth than most MMOs I've actually played. It's very difficult, managing your stats, having the correct things on. It's extremely important to follow builds. There's so many builds, videos, quest logs out there that you have to actually follow. So I don't think that the 12 ability thing is really bad. And even though the damage was already done because of the marketing, the game still ended up with the 330,000 people checking it out on the first day, right? So I don't think it was completely horrible, but they did really miss with showing off the combat and how bad the game was at the start. But they did do a full 180 on that.
It was looking to become Guild Wars for the Eastern market. Throne and Liberty would first launch in Korea December 7th, 2023, where it would manage to at least make the top 20 lists, which was nice, but not totally impressive when you consider some of the games that it was
And Aeon is top 5 still. Damn. The Eastern market just want super mobile pay-to-win games. They're like, nah, we don't want this. We don't want this.
Able to score better than Ion 1 and WoW. And these aren't even super popular games in Korea anyway. It seems that even amongst Korean gamers, Throne and Liberty was failing to impress, with the major reasons being cited for such.
I do think the reason it failed for Koreans, I'm going to be honest, is because it wasn't pay to win enough and mobile enough. That's hot take. You guys can get me for that, but I do think it failed in Korea because of that. And the Aeon 2, like I've been saying, is a perfect example. The game is extremely pay to win, super autoplay, fully infested with bots, but doing so good in Korea, top 5, top 4, top 3 continuously. So I think if the Throne Liberty was actually horrible with with combat and predatory and stuff, it would have done better in Korea for sure.
As the game's business plan,
I can die on that hill.
oops, not a good sign when a market used to more aggressive monetization is complaining about your monetization.
No, I don't think so.
And the second big reason cited was the game's lackluster combat system. To explain why that's such a big deal, in the Eastern market, that's pretty much the main course dish of the games. Look at games like Arcade, Blade and Soul, Terra, and of course Black Desert Online. These are very action-oriented Korean MMORPGs, and they would have some pretty good combat systems. Arguably, besides Guild Wars 2, features some of the best combat systems that we've seen a decade or more later. Throne and Liberty, according to Korean players, played worse than these games, and there didn't seem to be a significant payoff located elsewhere either. Not having a good combat system was a huge hindrance for Throne and Liberty's growth in the East, and was incredibly important because, as we've learned in the Death of a Game series, if a title from an Eastern publisher doesn't do well in their home market, even if the game turns a profit elsewhere, there's a high chance that they will still shut the game down, like they did with City of Heroes.
I mean, they didn't shut it down right now in Throne of Liberty. It's still top 25. However, I do agree the combat system and the action combat, for example, people are expecting way more action combat, while the game Throne of Liberty is more of a tap target game with a little bit of action combat skills. But if I had to like range it, I wouldn't range Throne of Liberty combat to be high tier, but I wouldn't either put it low tier either. I think the combat definitely could have been way better. But at the point when we first saw the combat, it was F tier. And then with the new improvements and the combat currently, I would put it closer to like a B tier, between B tier, maybe an A tier almost, but not a top tier combat for sure. But it's not even close to being like a bad F tier like it was previously.
If TNL didn't do well in Korea, it would have some serious ramifications that were impossible to skip for the rest of the world, such as content minimization, or delays, or worse, a server shutdown. But as things were moving along at launch in the East, at a slower than expected pace for NCSoft, who spent a reported $100+ million on Throne and Liberty, things were also moving ahead slower, but still in the West, with the closed beta, which would drop April 10th, 2024. Like with most if not all of NCSoft's major titles, I was invited to test the game early on, and to be honest, I liked what I experienced. I thought the combat looked and felt much better than when it was first teased.
LOL, it's the old skills. Oh, thank God they changed the UI with this. The old skills look horrible.
The combat was kind of like Guild Wars 2 or Arcade, but worse, with an action-style tap-target combat system that was a bit more tap-target than the others, but also felt just really weightless compared to both games. The game would allow you to switch between two main weapons, which would then change your ability to use certain abilities and thus your class as well. Depending on the timing of the NPC attacks, you could block or dodge them, or even dodge damage altogether. The guild systems being a major focus in the game was an interesting hook to me, as there are not many games on the market that are like that right now. But there was a little sneaky feeling I got when testing the game early on. How hollow it felt such a pretty looking game managed to feel. The same feeling I got when playing New World, ironically, but we're going to talk more about that later on when the game launches. Following the Korean launch and their quarter financials being updated, NCSoft would make a surprising move and refuse to break out the revenue for their newly launched MMORPG Throne and Liberty, despite having done it in the past historically with their other titles.
That is sus.
The only possible reason I can imagine for this is that, well, the game wasn't making how much money they were intending it to make. That wasn't a good look of things to come and was a pretty major sign.
The Korean, like, it got really hard slapped in Korea. The game did not do
the
good.
West could end up liking TNL more than the East. I mean, Arcade did exceedingly well in the West, but considering the large criticism surrounding the game, which we will dive into more shortly, it wasn't very likely. As TNL was reaching its open beta in the West, in July of 2024, it was falling out of the top 50 in Korea. The West was so starved for a new game, though, that I would hear positive impressions from the game's open beta. Though
MMO fans are starved. We just want a AAA that works. The thing with Throne of Liberty, and I think the reason why it has such an appeal compared to other MMOs, was it was new and fresh, AAA, and it was PvP focused. We haven't gotten a PvP focused MMO in a long time, but what we also know about PvP MMOs is they don't have long shelf lives. Like, it's really fun at the start when there's a bunch of players, massive alliances fighting for the PvP throne, but it gets boring really quick. That's why Throne of Liberty right now has shifted more into, in my opinion, more of a PvE game with some PvP features, but it was heavily PvP. However, the change from PvP to PvE took too long and they lost too many players.
Part of that was also related to how little people got to actually test the game during this testing phase, making it quite hard to actually get a really good feel of how the game was set to be, since MMORPGs take more time than just a couple of days to make such assessments. The big kicker behind everything was the game was free, so many people like me, feeling lukewarm or not, would say stuff like, hey, give it a try.
But the game being free I do agree with it, but at the same time, you attract the worst of the worst players when the game is completely free. Now the also thing is, it is the new system. It's the new way to do it. I mean, all the Koreans know it. You make the game free. You have a bunch of monetization. That's how you make money because you can attract them. And if you're smart enough, especially NC Soft, they're really smart with their monetization. You can make people spend money, $10 here, $20 here, because they make this gap and the skill gap between you and the combat gap between you. You just feel like, okay, maybe if I spend just a little bit, maybe if I just buy the battle pass, I can catch up, right? So they get people to get the game for free, and then they get people to spend 10, $20 here and there, and eventually they spend 100, $200, and that's way more than they would spend on a normal game, right? So it's a very smart way to just get players in, because by being free, you get absolutely everybody testing your game out, but that's how they catch you with the
It's
monetization.
free, at least. That was going to open them up to some major markets, one they didn't have a lot of experience with, despite popular belief from the outside, or even those watching now. But free-to-play also comes with its problems. A low barrier to entry is great because it means you can have more people playing your game or trying it out, but it also comes with its problems. A low barrier to entry also makes things like botting or gold farming far more effective and more accessible. It also changes how a game is structured, progression-wise, and how the game is intending on making its money, because games have to make money. The reason that free-to-play games are more so associated with pay-to-win, though, is because they have no choice but to nickel and dime you in some sort of way to make a profit.
Yeah.
It's just that the level of which they do that and how much is kind of arguable. At least what is acceptable. Between NCSoft and AGS, there was likely little chance that either of them would make this realization that if they weren't careful on the monetization with their new game, they would turn everyone off the game, free or not, for different reasons. AGS, skill issue, but NCSoft got away with making more money to win games in the past. The difference being they were actually good and innovative games, and Throne and Liberty was failing to seem anything like that. Throne and Liberty would launch in the rest of the world starting September 26th, due to the early start afforded to those who would purchase a Founders Pack granting them early access.
True.
This pack would cost a
I forgot
whopping
that.
$40 and is a classic MMORPG in virtual.
You know, actually, guys, if you guys didn't know, the only time I spend money in this game, Throne Liberty, is the Founders Pack. I never bought Lucent or anything inside of the game. I've been completely free to play. More of a principle thing for me, not spending money on pay to win. But yeah, I don't have any fancy arc boss weapons, but I've managed. But I completely forgot about those packs.
To a world marketing tactic, as FOMO is a large core aspect of an online RPG, though the servers would face some downtime during this at launch, which would anger so many people that you can see who purchased this pack on Steam, making it a very negatively reviewed pack, claiming they should be afforded some money back or currency
True.
to account for the fact that there was downtime during this. Now, MMORPG launches are murky and there's always server downtime, but if you're going to make people pay for that kind of money, you better be feeling pretty confident you can pull this kind of stuff off. The rest of the world would get the chance to play the game, though, on October 1st, 2024, roughly 1 year after the Korean launch. Scoring a 72 out of 100 on aggregate review website Metacritic, IGN France would rate the game a 7 out of 10 and state that Throne and Liberty has enormous potential with its captivating world and universe, and above all, its highly successful and unique gameplay. While the story isn't groundbreaking, progress is slow but steady, and every moment is a delight thanks to the sumptuous art direction. However, it's not for everyone. Oh, by the way, this is a translation, as it requires a significant investment to fully appreciate what it has to offer. The cash shop also allows for a bit too much, and risks negatively impacting the experience and game balance. That said, Throne and Liberty is free, and trying it out is worth a shot. I'm gonna call bull on the captivating world and universe, but
I mean, Throne Liberty was incredibly fun though at the start. It was. That's why most people actually had really fun. Massive GVG fights, massive boss fights, huge alliances fighting each other. The world looked actually really good. The game itself is incredibly good looking. While it does feel empty at times, I do think that the whole seeing so many players running around fighting, we had shot callers, calling CC stuns. A lot of people didn't get that experience because people played solo or whatever. But this game was really about like being inside of a guild and playing with a guild, and that's where you saw the potential of the game. If you played solo or you were in there for PvE, you didn't see the full aspect and the good aspect of the game. I'm gonna be honest with you.
maybe if somebody like that isn't used to playing online games like this, they might feel differently. MMORPG, on the other hand, would score it a 6 out of 10. The more seasoned of the reviewers and state that Throne and Liberty was a game I wanted to love. It was something I had anticipated for roughly a decade with the hope in my heart that it would be good. I see the skeleton of something I adored. The massive PvP battles, the caution that came with entering places like the Ant's Nest to get rare jewelry, and the social component that I honestly sorely miss. But the poor localization and uninteresting story and reliance on PvP for progression makes the game a hard recommendation. It's a shame, because there is a glimmer of something great there, but Throne and Liberty just isn't that.
That's exactly what I'm saying. If you came into this game wanting to enjoy some PvP experience, large scale, you would have fun. But if you came in for storyline, PvE, whatever, that's the main problem that people had. You know, that we've been playing these PvE MMOs for so long, and Throne Liberty did not deliver on that, and it turned a lot of people off from the game.
But since I got the chance to test the game and also play it post-launch, I think I will try and offer some of my own personal take on the game. Based on my 20-plus career in virtual worlds, having tested basically all of the major ones, especially the NCSoft titles, Throne and Liberty looks like there's a lot to it. But in reality, especially for those who've already played some of the major titles in the space, it doesn't offer anything newer or better executed than any of the games that you've already played.
While I agree on that, I have to say the main problem with MMOs in general is and then many others are looking for new MMOs. Even though there are some really good MMOs out there, we have World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy, Guild Wars, whatever. They are old. You know, people that play through them. The whole point of trying to find a new gen MMO is just exciting, right? But you're not going to get anything new or innovative, unfortunately. But I just want a new MMO using the old systems, which is completely fine, but just deliver. Deliver on the balancing, deliver on the world, deliver on the PvE and PvP, deliver on the balancing. That's what I'm looking for. So I've tested all new MMOs because I don't really want to go and play old MMOs. I don't want to play World of Warcraft. I don't play Final Fantasy. I want to play new, good AAA MMOs. New World was a good experience. I just saw Lost Ark. It was really fun, but didn't last, extremely predatory, right? That's what I'm looking for. So it doesn't have to have anything new and crazy. You just have to be as good as the old MMOs, but with a newer engine. That's all I'm asking for, to be honest.
The complexity of the game is around the amount of power systems that it contains, with every single weapon having upgrades, armor pieces having them, and even skills. But that complexity is more about like needless complexity when you realize it's all organized around a power gear treadmill that incentivizes you to spend money on the currency needed to keep upgrading. The base leveling and combat experience early on in the game is incredibly easy and fast happening, serving more as a tutorial for the endgame experience as typical in most Korean titles. Sadly, the combat though, despite looking flashy, is quite floaty, and lacks any of the previous innovations of the previously successful action MMORPGs that I've already mentioned, such as things like physics-based attacks, comboing, and unique combat states. It plays like something that would have impressed you back in like pre-2010s. The story, I have no idea what the story was, and I don't care enough to go back and figure it out, despite going back and recording footage.
I mean, I don't play MMOs for stories. I'm gonna be honest. I hit that escape. No matter how good the story is, I don't play MMOs for stories. I say this to everybody, even though Final Fantasy, for example, has amazing story. The whole purpose of me playing an MMORPG is to get the whole massive multiplayer online feel, right? Playing with a bunch of players, seeing players absolutely everywhere, being able to queue, match with players, make friends, all that. That's why I play MMO. If I play a game for story, I would probably play a really good single target or single RPG game, right?
For this, it's totally forgettable. There's no memorable characters or big story moments in it.
He doesn't know about Calanthea. What do you mean there's no memorable characters? Have you seen Calanthea? She's thick. Come on, bro. She was single for Valentine's Day. What you mean, no memorable characters?
And it's somehow worse than the base story in Guild Wars 2, which came out 10 years prior. And it's certainly worse than ESO's base story, or Final Fantasy XIV's, or other possible competitors. Meaning if the story isn't better than any of the other games, well, then you pretty much have to make sure the combat's going to be better. And it's just not. It's not better than any of the titles that I mentioned. It's worse than ArcAge, Terra Online, Vindictus, Black Desert Online, and other iconic Korean action online.
Yeah, but now you're listing like hot top tier combat MMOs. Like I said, right now, I don't know back then. I actually do kind of remember back then. I would say the combat right now, it's not bad. It's not bad at all. There is huge balancing problems, yes. But there's so much variety in combat. The way the weapons work, the different skills you have. It's massive varieties, a lot of fun stuff you can do, a lot of different builds that you can do. Balancing is not there, but the combat isn't bad. As a type target game with some action features, if you go into it, look at knowing that it's a tap target game, it's actually really good for tap target. But but it doesn't compete with the top tier action combat games, of course. But it's not as bad as he makes it sound out to be. Yes, it was bad very early on, but not anymore.
Online RPGs. TNL is a hollow world where you can't remember anyone's name that you interact with in the game and reflexively skip the text to get to the next quest and to the endgame, which is level 50 and beyond. And if you aren't willing to team up with a powerful guild, good luck getting anything done or getting any world boss drops or
Yeah, you definitely have to play with a guild. That's what I said in purpose at the start too. If you didn't get into a guild and didn't have that whole guild PP experience, you're not gonna have fun in the game, unfortunately.
participating in the world versus world form of siege battles or PvP around the map. There's nothing wrong with having a game be more group focused or PvP focused or whatever else, but the game also has to build or offer an environment that allows for that, and one that also makes it easy for players to group up and play together. And it still has to also allow for more than just one type of group play, which
Now it has gotten better though. I mean, he's speaking from early on, obviously. I can clearly tell because right now the game has shifted from a PvP focus to a PvE focus, right? Now, even though the game is not delivering content as fast as I wanted it to, and they're really dropping the ball when they release really good content, like for example, raids, they wait too long between each to release like a new type of raid or new type of content. But the game has shifted more towards more of a PvE feel to the game while having PvP still there. But they've taken way too long to make that shift. And I wish the game actually had those PvE and PvP features from the start of the game. I think it would be done. They would do way better. But he is right. At the start of the game, there was not enough content for people that didn't want to do hardcore PvP.
sadly in Throne and Liberty, it didn't. The majority of the game is centered around PvP, which is not that strange as it's typical in most Korean MMORPGs.
Not anymore.
That being said, the problem was if you're trying to relate to a Western audience with a formula that hasn't historically worked there besides Ion, and even that's questionable, you should probably make sure it doesn't come across that way. And, well, it's more accessible. Instead, TNL is built on the same core as Arcade and Lineage was, both created by the same creator, Jake Song. Except he wasn't involved in this project, and there was no innovation probably because of it. That's accruing power and grinding to become more powerful, before your guild then is able to dominate other guilds in PvP. Whales versus whales, where the biggest spenders are the biggest threats. The difference being Lineage was one of a kind at the time it dropped back in 1998. And Arcade was and is still one of the most innovative MMORPGs ever. Throne and Liberty? It feels like Unreal Engine 4, the MMORPG, which comes with its pluses and minuses, but mostly minuses as the incredibly generic world and graphics just do the game no favors.
But the game looks good. I don't know why people say the game doesn't look good. Am I just blind? Like, there's a lot of, don't get me wrong. I trash this game a lot. People call me Doom poster of the game. But the one thing is the game, think the game actually looks pretty good.
There's nothing wrong with the core of TNL being predictable, or being the same sort of content that we've seen before. But if it's not executed in a better or more exciting way than what we've seen before, it's not likely going to draw people away from the games they've already been playing regularly. TNL seems to have the exact same content ideas as Guild Wars 2 did, but 10 years later, with none of the same tools or features or innovation, and nothing else to show for it either. It feels like a game made in a vacuum, a common phrase I've been uttering when referring to virtual worlds in the past 10 years. According to IGN and reports from AGS, Throne and Liberty had reached a whopping 3 million players in just 1 week. And
now, I gotta be honest, guys. I gotta be honest. I already mentioned this. I don't know if it's hot take, but you don't need to be super innovative with MMORPGs. The reason people enjoy MMORPGs is because they enjoy those old features. Yes, we are starting to have more TikTok brains, so people don't like grinding as much anymore. But the game doesn't have to be super unique or innovative. We just want a well-functioning game, good combat, good open world. You can use progression systems from older MMOs, not heavy monetization, and people will play it. But the main problem with MMOs in general is you cannot keep up the content updates. And people with their TikTok brains, if there's no content to do, people leave the game. They don't want to come back, right? So unless you can release an MMO and have continuously content updates going, the game is not going to work, especially in newer times. MMOs are not going to last.
Reached as much as 330,000 peak players on Steam. It should be stated, though, that players could refer to someone just playing as little as just a minute, and it's hard to parse that data as something significant other than just meaning that it reached a lot of players. What's more important is how fast they would burn through said player base, or how fast they would gain new players. Speaking of burning players out, though, that seemed to come kind of on accident, as AGS seemed to be oblivious to the fact that if they offered server transfers from early start servers to the fresh start servers, even if it was on accident, players who did that could ascend to a power level untouched, and do so as a guild, locking down parts of the world and map to even further assert their power.
That was really bad too at the start of the game, early on, how guilds would control certain servers, and then they will run from competition so they can farm arc boss and strong weapons. So people just the big guilds would just run away to empty servers and just dominate. It was really toxic. They will steal all the loot. It wasn't really good for the community, in my opinion. It was really bad at the start.
And that's exactly what happened. While AGS would course correct a little by forcing those players to transfer back, guilds
They should have forced. I don't know how they would have, but if they forced those top guilds to fight each other, it would have been better.
were still able to lock down servers, and did so just like they did in World of Warcraft Classic. These guilds would
I was part of the biggest guild, and we at the start fought strong guilds, but all of them ended up going to empty servers. And every time you transferred after them or to a different server to fight the biggest guild, they would just run away.
team up and
And you
keep
couldn't
other
do
players
anything.
from even accessing parts of the map, one-shotting you instantly as you would load in or attempt to flee. They would then have access to major field bosses, dungeons, and later on, raids that you wouldn't. This is where PvP takes a major step into the picture, but ends up becoming just a major barrier to enjoy any of the other parts of the game too, and it clearly is the major focus in TNL. That's because there was almost no way to avoid the conflict, despite promises of other ways to enjoy the game.
I mean, now there is, though. Now we have like peace bosses, most of the stuff you can get single target. They still do have some GVG, and they have tuned down the alliance sizes, so it's only one alliance. I hope they tune it down to 0 alliances because the way the game is going. But back then it used to be a problem. Now there are more ways to get
You can't even
items.
travel to one of these key bosses or key locations without just getting whacked. And since gear score matters so much in this game, even more than skill, which is
Gear score doesn't matter, but stats matter. The way you build your character matters. If you don't understand how you're building your character, you can easily, as a 7k GS, defeat an 8k GS if you're building right. GS doesn't matter. However, strong arc boss weapons that you can pay to win do matter a lot, and the way you build. So if you're not following a good build or using a good build, you are going to get demolished, unfortunately. That's the biggest problem with new players coming into the game. They don't understand that you need to build a certain way because the game is kind of complicated, and they don't put the time in to learn how to build. So casual players, they have a really bad experience because even though they're like, yo, I'm 8k GS, I still can't beat him because you're not building correctly, and you definitely have to dive deeper. I think that was one of the strengths with the game, but now it's become more of a weakness because it's too complicated. And if you're not getting influx of new players that want to play the game, you're not gonna survive, right, as a game. So they have to make it a little bit more easier for new players to get inside of the game, and maybe make less stats and stop making certain stats so overpowered.
kind of the classic KR virtual world rat race thing, where PvP is the actual focus of the game and PvE and grinding are just kind of like a means to further and strengthen that end. You can literally get one shot if you make any false moves, making playing just after reaching max level quite difficult if you're not willing to join an already winning or big successful guild. While Arcade suffered from this as well, at least in that game you had a world to discover, and more things to do, like trade packs, fishing, traveling on your boat, and so on and so forth. Throne and Liberty was so empty. A few weeks after launch would be the update 1.3, which was well received because it would allow you now to queue for all dungeons at the same time, and now you couldn't kick players in the middle of a boss fight. Yeah, that was a thing. It was actually like a prominent thing. If you
I remember that. I mean, now the quality of life with a lot of the dungeon stuff had gotten way better, though.
missed a key dodge or made a mistake, you could get kicked in the middle of a fight. That's because Throne and Liberty is an endless treadmill designed that way in its core systems. The amount of ways you can spend money on this game is insane, and the amount of things that you can grind are innumerable. Everything is set up just like a little dopamine casino hit, waiting for you to take or make your next hit.
The pay to win is bad when it comes to the arc boss weapons and the heroic weapons when they introduce them, but I'm not gonna say too much of but we have to say that the pay to win, even though it is really bad, I have been complete free to play, but the biggest problem I have is I cannot swap between weapons. I can only stick to one type of weapon. So when certain weapons can become OP, I cannot unless I pay to win. That's the worst part about the game. The good thing is you can earn the pay to win currency inside of the game. While, for example, in Aeon 2, you cannot. You have to actually pay. That's why I keep saying the pay to win level of the game is 5 to 6 out of 10. while in Aeon or other pay-to-win games, it's going to be like 9 out of 10. But it's still bad.
And because there isn't
Still
any
bad.
uniting story or community
That's her. That's what I said. That's Calanthea. What you mean?
aspects of the game, outside of your guild especially, players are more likely to be toxic to each other and not want to help each other. This is made worse by the fact that in order to even get your higher level gear and
That's in every MMO though. People like to gatekeep it like crazy. That's why what I like to do with my channel is everything I find out. Back in the day when I was like, I used to gatekeep too, like buffs and certain things and how to gear up, like back in the 10 years. But I just realized if you're a good player, you're still going to be on top of everybody else, but you can at least give the knowledge to everybody else so they can feel better and enjoy the game in a different way, right? But a lot of guilds and stuff, hard gate kept, different strategies and stuff, even some bugs and exploits that they abused for a long time, which was really unhealthy for the game.
TNL, you have to endlessly grind the same dungeons.
And yeah, and that's the problem with the TNL. Even though you grind endless dungeons, the game actually never gave you good rewards. That's the worst part about it, in my opinion. The worst part about Throne Liberty is not you have to do endless grind, but it just felt useless. It just felt useless, the grind, because they like barely rewarded you. They still barely reward you inside of the game. I think that's one of the most toxic things with the game. You can spend hours and hours and hours by doing dailies, and you don't get enough rewards.
I'm talking about doing the same dungeons 30 plus times, because the most ideal thing is just completing the same dungeons that you already did and getting your tokens. And even then, that's the best case scenario. Some sets could take you even longer, because you're not guaranteed a drop, even for your weapon. Free-to-play players would naturally start running out of tokens needed to even do the dungeons in the first place, which was probably on purpose, right, and designed, further time-gating you. And before you say, hey, time-gating is good because it makes content more approachable and casual, sure, that might be true, but TNL was allowing you to pay your way past this problem, which was just another way the game was incredibly pay-to-win. Layoffs would hit the TNL team, which was sort of expected after its launch, with some positions becoming redundant. But Vice was reporting there was more than just that, with the possibilities of mass layoffs. These layoffs were met with a company restructuring, the spawning of 3 new game studios under the NCSoft banner, with one, Studio X, now being in charge of TNL. This studio, led by the producer Moon Young Choi, who took over after An Jong Ok departed, would now be in charge of handling TNL's affairs and future content. Leaning Up by NCSoft in preparation for their post-launch window for their next game was worrying, when Leaning Up was taking chunks out of their company. This was a game that was built on adding content consistently and building that game, its mechanics, and its world. They couldn't afford to lean up too much because they already spent so much money on the game. When you've spent more than $100 million on a game, that means that your ROI is expected to be at least double, triple, if not more than that. To accomplish something, that's a lot of success that you're expecting. That means out of all of the 3 million...
Oh, he doesn't know about this content. The Tower of Greed content? Should I talk about this? No, we're gonna skip this. So they added, okay, I can talk about this. It's added, for people that know, they added this content, new solo tower, and it's the worst content we see. They hyped it up for so long. We've been having no content for so many months that they finally introduced it. It gives no rewards, extremely boring, extremely bad. It seems like some boring random mobs that they put in that you have to do. It is horrible. It is horrible. They are fixing it, but damn, they dropped the ball and they barely gives rewards.
Players who tried the game in that week, they would have had to spend $33 on it each. Meaning if you're trying to build a free-to-play game that milks you over time, even that wouldn't make enough money in such a short time. It would take them...
But they are making hella money though on Steam. They did get top 30 revenue, which is pretty crazy. I don't know if it's enough to maintain it, but it's pretty crazy to have that high of a number in a game with these few amount of players.
A year or years to make that kind of money back, if they ever would. But these layoffs were likely coinciding with the lack of success, with TNL back in the home market of Korea. Within 1 month, and the peak population would half or more, showcasing that free-to-play or not, the player drop rate wasn't going to be outpaced by the entrance rate. This hemorrhaging rate was nearly unstoppable at the rate in which it was going, and it was going to eventually lead to the death of the game. November 13th, 2024, and a major update would trigger, bringing with it some much requested changes, one of them being a highly requested and utterly random that it was even in the game, Peace Mode World Boss change. These changes would have a timer to spawn a safe passage portal to go fight the world boss. This would allow for some players, for the first time, the chance to go fight the world boss. Now that's awesome, but it highlights an even worse problem of the game and arguably one of the biggest problems of the game for those who've actually played it, and that's the gear treadmill in the game. Yeah, sure, you probably correctly expected an intense one when it comes to a Korean MMORPG, MMORPG, especially an NCSoft one, but the gear treadmill in TNL wasn't just big and problematic, it was totally boring and robbed you of one of the greatest joys of playing an online RPG, and that's looting and powering up your character. Finding quality gear is tough, and actually achieving and grabbing said armor pieces is even more tough.
Yes, I agree. There is really horrible how lackluster getting running dungeons and the rewards are. This is one of the biggest problems that I've been very vocal about. Is we grind these boring dungeons over and over again, which is fine if you reward us. The problem is grinding this and not getting rewarded. That still till this day has been super bad.
Because you're basically just juggling tokens up until you can finally pull the piece that you want, which is not guaranteed, and it could take you dozens of dungeons or raids to even achieve. It's less
It was
let's
awful.
get these high-end content pieces to get paid, and more like let's do
Still
these
is.
high-end content pieces and maybe get something, which isn't as motivating for an online RPG. The carrot on the stick is supposed to be motivating you, not outrunning you. Seeing people wear nice gear and wanting to see your own character progress is the thing that keeps you going. You don't want it to become a source of pain or anxiety reminding you that you aren't good enough, and you should spend more money, since that just kind of reminds you.
I mean, that is the way they do it. At Throne Liberty, the biggest way to make money, but they make money, is through arc boss weapons, which are extremely expensive and was back in the day. Not expensive anymore, like they were back in the day, but still expensive. And second is making people swap between weapons. That's the biggest moneymaker they have, is making classes overpowered so people swap in between each other, and then they introduce new sets of gear, and they have introduced new sets of gear pretty hardcore. Like we got an insane amount of sets within a few years. So those are like the three biggest money makers within the game: new sets of gear, swapping between weapons, and then the arc boss weapons.
Of the real world. And well, they want you to spend money to circumvent the problems. That's why Throne and Liberty, I say, feels more like a casino or a pachinko machine than a video game. You have a massive cash shop and essentially everything is purchasable. And if you want to compete with the top guilds, you won't have a choice but to spend money, especially when the combat is not so skill intensive, so gear advantage is even greater. Sure, TNL is free, but playing the game has a good chance of opening up your pocketbook no matter what. And what is there to play or enjoy without spending money is not even really worth it anyway. Call of the Spear, the first major content update for the game, would drop December 4th, 2024, and introduce the spear weapon.
And guess what? The spear was absolutely broken for a long time because they wanted people to swap to the spear so they can make more money.
Functions like a new class in the game, coming with it a new stat to boot. But this wasn't the only change in that update. There was also new content in the form of custom lobby PvP matches and a custom difficulty dungeon system. They even would add a rune system, which would further allow you to amplify your character and, well, how much money you would spend on said character, with you needing to purchase a rune hammer, which then would allow you to RNG reroll for superior.
I mean, runes were never pay to win, though. Yeah, they were never pay to win.
Sound familiar? With every major update, there seemed to be also more ways added to make money off of you, as if they hadn't made enough or anywhere close to it. And, well, they probably hadn't. NCSoft wasn't seeing the kind of return on their investment that they wanted. And AGS, well, they just had a contract to handle the game. They were just collecting money, what money they could extract, and weren't really worried about the bigger picture anyway. Showing the lack of success of the new MMORPG would be a massive server merger happening in February 2025.
Guess what? We're getting a new server merge now.
And turning 107 servers into just 25 of them.
And now it's going to be maybe down to 7 or 8 per region.
By this point, the peak population also would hit under 40,000 players, and while it would jump up above one more time...
40,000 is not bad, though. Remember, this is peak numbers. That means more players are actually playing on each server. This is just when they're at the all-time peak, which is normally around arc boss bosses or whatever.
It would never quite reach this level of popularity again. But TNL wouldn't stop putting out content, with their first major expansion to come, March 2025, introducing a new zone to the game, customizable weapon masteries,
Hi, it's the boy Tico,
and more dungeons and unique events. And look, I have no issue with repeatable content or even grinding, depending on the context. But if that's all your game has to offer, it better have really good combat, or a good community to accompany it. TNL had neither of those, so repeatable content was basically all you had to do in the game, and it's even stranger when Tico, the game's design manager for AGS, is talking about classes. Meanwhile, unlike Guild Wars and TNL, these classes are just more like archetypes, with two weapons mixed together.
No, they are... I think they are classes. They feel like actual classes. They're not as hollow as archetypes or things like that just because you feel like you can swap between the weapons. You're kind of locked into the class you play for a pretty long time. Like most mages play Staff Dagger in PvP. That's mainly what they play. That's what their role is. Tanks play mainly SNSGS. That's usually the role they play as a tank. That's what you're known for as a tank. You can play different type of tanks, of course, and mage and whatever, but you do have like a certain role, right? You usually have your main weapon in this game, and the second weapon is more of a support weapon. So you define your role that type of way.
You guys should probably use better terminology or more accurate terminology, right? But anyway, the new lands
And the game, I mean, the classes are like 40, 50. I didn't even learn all the classes. I still don't know all the classes' names by heart. I know most of them, the most important ones.
introduced would almost double the game's landmass and increase the level cap to 55. It would also introduce Tier 2, solo dungeons, and the ability to PvP in 1v1 arenas. There was a lot of content added with this expansion.
Talandra was good. Early Talandra was good. I'm gonna give credit. Talandra was not bad.
Was free, to be fair. But again, we circle back to a recurring theme I highlight every time we cover an expansion in one of these Death of a Game videos, and that's that expansions typically only bring in returning players and do little to actually affect the player base outside of the existing one, meaning that even if this was a good expansion, that would only impress the players still playing the game. But I have to give AGS and NCSoft credit, as although they launched their Western version of the game nearly a year after the KR version, within just 6 months, this expansion would allow the Western players to catch up to the Eastern players in terms of
That's
content.
what I said.
That likely contributed to why the population would jump back up to 49,000 players peak on Steam, before just a couple of months after having it drop down to a career low of 25,000 at the time. These little hits to your population are helpful, but can you really keep up with the development scale and resources needed to pump out expansion after expansion, especially when you're clearly making so little money?
The problem is they didn't follow up. They did a big expansion, things were good, but they didn't have enough content plan. They didn't have enough balancing. They didn't talk enough with the players. And then they introduced the heroic gear after, which way too long. And they made promises of content coming. They're gonna introduce raids and stuff, but it just took way too long time, and people just got bored.
NCSoft isn't even bragging about it. The game's first raid would drop 8 months after launch,
Yeah.
June 25th, 2025, which was sort of crazy in hindsight.
That's our Calanthea.
Even if you argue that field bosses or world bosses largely had replaced that in terms of like the main, content sources, it seemed more and more like Throne and Liberty was trying to copy one of its older stablemates, even by content design, like Guild Wars 2, without actually knowing how or what made
I mean, more of a Lost Ark copy, but sure.
the game successful. Think about it. Guild Wars 2 also didn't have raids or strike missions when it launched, relying on open world bosses and dungeons. The difference is that was back in 2012 and
The raid was extremely fun. The problem is that they never followed up. No second raid ever. Nothing. And I like the heroic weapon system or legendary weapon system that they added with the raid, which is really cool. And but there's huge problems with it because you can swap traits, and heroic traits were extremely pay to win. But the raid was fun. But then there was no follow up. Again, they released good content, but no follow
Guild
up.
Wars 2 boasted some of the best combat we've ever seen. That content system also wasn't really even successful for the game anyway and was largely complained about until they would finally redo it later on. Now we have Throne and Liberty trying to follow that same game plan without the same, big promises of what's to come after that, without any of the bells and whistles, the innovative aspects that made Guild Wars 2 so iconic and still makes it that. Now I know Guild Wars 2 wasn't ever a hit in Korea, but
He really likes Guild Wars 2. The thing with Guild Wars 2 is it's a fun game, but there's no progression aspect to the game. So it's really hard to compare the two, in my opinion. Guild Wars 2 is really a good MMO to go back to, right? Always fun. Your character is there. You have all the gear, all the stuff, but you cannot play it for a long period of time, in my opinion. It's very separate, very different.
But apparently someone there liked it so much, instead of making a Lineage game, and name or not, they made a Guild Wars and Lineage game, yet failed to impress or bring something new to the table than any of the other IPs did. The new field event would be added for update 2.18, but again, while these events were fun and looked nice, they offered nothing newer or better than Guild Wars 2 in what it was offering, or even Warhammer Online. Worse, they had a worse tagging system where you would be lucky to even get a participation trophy if you killed a field boss in TNL, or feel like you even made a difference. How TNL's system there is worse than Guild Wars 2 or the game that they learned it from, Warhammer Online, is just bewildering to me. What made Japan's foray globally into...
I mean, they want to make sure that field boss things are awarded to the top DPSs because they are the top spenders. Rewarding the top spenders obviously is good. It's not healthy for the game, but that's like the mindset they probably went with. I don't like it. I mean, as a tank or as a healer, it's horrible doing field bosses in general without a proper team and stuff, but that's the way they did it, right? They want to award the biggest whales, so they spend more.
MMORPGs and MMORPGs less so. So successful was their willingness to study the titans of the industries. Diablo, Ultima
I mean, they
Online.
studied it, but they're obviously making prioritizing profit, right? They know what would be like. Let's be real. All right, let's not try to beat around the bush. They know exactly what are the best systems. Been developing MMOs for a long time. They know what are the best systems, what people really like, what people would enjoy. But at the end of the day, these things are not important. What is important is profit. What makes the most money? What makes the most profit? What are people okay with? What are people tolerating? That's the most important thing. Not what people really enjoy, what people really want.
And of course, World of Warcraft, and learn from what made them so special. While Korea has been successful, and arguably the most successful in the realm of virtual worlds, they seem to lack the same ability to study a genre or game, perfect it, something they ironically showcase more so in other aspects of tech. But this is exactly the game that they're trying to make with Throne and Liberty, without any of the market research, or features to be competitive therewith. This would be reflected in the game's population, which would lose 95% of its population by September 10th, 2025, hitting as low as 25,000 players. Free-to-play games might have
That's clickbait.
percent of its
That's
population by
clickbait.
September 10th, 20.
From 3 million at launch to 13,000 concurrent. If you're going to use concurrent or peak numbers, right, you cannot compare the total amount of players. Then you have to compare it to total amount of players right now. The total amount of players playing the game right now, even though it says peak 8,000, it's not 8,000, it's way more. Because the peak is when most players are playing at the same time, right? We've seen with the active number of players logging into servers, it's more closer to 100K or whatever, right? Not 13K. You cannot use the total. You can use 330,000, which was the peak, with the current peak, which is like 13K. But you can't use the total numbers. Come on, guys.
As low as
what are we doing?
Players. Free-to-play game.
I wanna talk bad about the game too, but at least we gotta use the right numbers.
Games might have a low barrier to entry, but MMORPGs typically don't. And the one that NCSoft had built with TNL was even less accessible and approachable than past titles in that sense, which was creating a stank cloud around the game, leading to people not only not recommending it by word of mouth, the most powerful marketing tool in online gaming, but even leading to people just saying bad things about the game, of what they saw to be and perceived as an incredibly pay-to-win game that wasn't worth the value offering. The same sort of thing that I claimed in my other video concerning another AGS published title, Lost Ark.
Now, let me ask you guys, honestly, when it comes to Throne and Liberty, or give me new gen MMOs, not old MMOs, new gen MMOs. I would love for you guys to tell me, new gen MMO wise, which game is better than Throne and Liberty. Like, I hate on Throne and Liberty all the time, but let's just be honest for a second. New gen MMOs, which game is better than Throne and Liberty? Let me know in the comments. Because New World is gone. Lost Ark is heavy pay to win. All Ash of Cremation is GG'd. There's no new gen MMOs, in my opinion, that is better than Throne Liberty. Doesn't mean Throne Liberty is good, but if you compare it to new gen MMOs, I don't see it.
There was nothing wrong with being a product good at making money, but if everyone can smell that stench of money hungriness on you and you feel desperate in the context of media, even, meaning you don't impress enough to be worth it or to hide that veneer, people are going to be wiser about your plans to make money there, then provide value. And that's an important balance in business that you can't tip too much into one direction. The next major update to come to the game, not called an expansion, but close to the same level of one, would be Update 3.0, and that was dubbed Silicium's Awakening. This update would introduce the Orb weapon, a new 24 versus 24.
That's the hyper. I'm gonna be honest. The hyper boost was a great success. There was no marketing done. A lot of new players came back to the game, but again, they did not maintain it. We've seen the same pattern with the game. They release good content, and they don't maintain it at all. They don't care about maintaining it. They want to get players back into the game, shove pay to win in their face, milk some money, and then stop. That's the pattern. They're never maintaining the numbers. They're never giving updates. They're never making sure that the new players are having fun with the game. They just release it. Hey, come back to the game. You can catch up. Shove pay to win in the face.
Battleground, Tier 3, and House.
Battlegrounds were extremely fun too.
Boost to get to 6,000 plus combat power or gear score if you want to think of it that way, aka get to the end game immediately. A band-aid sign for me that the game's leveling process is boring and not rewarding enough. In TNL's case,
not really. That hyper boost was extremely well done. Getting up to 6K was not enough, but the problem is not leveling. The leveling, you still have to do the leveling inside of the game, right? But it's the gearing process. Like, you're so far behind on the gearing that you need a catch-up mechanic. So the catch-up mechanic was good. The leveling didn't change. The way you leveled still was the same way. You have to do the main quest, blah, 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 right? But it's the gearing that was the issue. So it was great for new players. It just wasn't maintained at all. legacy players, which are like the old classic players, could come into Hyperboost server and steal all the boss loot, and they never compensated for that. That was huge problems.
It was in the form of the new hyper-boosted servers, which would allow players to reach 6,000 combat score within just 3 months. But everything in TNL just felt like you were playing on a schedule, even with the hyper-boost servers unless you decided to pay money. But hey, adding housing was at least adding more ways for players to enjoy the game, outside of the power grind of PvP or PvE. It's just that adding...
They're making so much money on housing. I hate housing, but they're making so much money on housing. They're pushing so much housing stuff.
Doesn't give your game a community. You have to have a number of them working in tandem together and build the right kind of mythos that also supports that. The mythos in Throne and Liberty, despite being removed from the Lineage name, just felt like a generic version of that, and nothing new or unique ever being presented. Sure, there's some cool bells and whistles like travel forums and the shiny graphics, but think about it. What story or lore-wise do you remember?
You said shiny graphics. I thought you said it looked bad. Come on, give it to us. Graphics are good.
About Throne and Liberty, besides the awful localization job that Amazon Game Studios did there, or my first quest had a misspelling in it. Nothing. There wasn't a story supporting the world, which is how you can bring players into each other's
I don't
arms
agree with the
together
story
off the
thing.
jump.
I don't
Instead,
think
you just
story
have
is
this
important in
shiny-looking
MMOs.
hollow world where people are only interested in doing top DPS, whether PvE or PvP, and there's no...
I mean, that's what they do in every MMOs. Always top. The DPS is always chasing DPS meters. I mean, that's where it comes from, right? Always chasing DPS meters in every MMO. Unfortunately, that's just how the community is.
Connected systems, you know, the A game that you would expect to see from NCSoft. It's not there. There's no innovation except maybe their ability to house so many players in the same zones at the level of graphics that they do. But then that makes the game feel more like a giant, pretty-looking tech demo more than a compelling world or game.
See, he's saying the game is looking pretty. I caught you, bro.
Korean titles didn't just become popular from being grindy games. MapleStory, Lineage, and Ragnarok Online and more did so by also being innovative, charming, and relatable. And, well, cool virtual worlds that you could travel to that were different from our own world, transporting you somewhere else and allowing you to complete your fantasy of playing another character. You know, the core of an MMORPG. Throne and Liberty had none of that charm. No humor, no whoa, that quest was wild and I'll never forget it. Everything had already been done before, but now was done again in a more generic Unreal Engine 4 container. The next update would introduce ranked battlegrounds, a ping system, and more life skills to the game. Oh yeah, I haven't mentioned life skills before, but that's because, well, you have such few options. Gathering
and life skilling isn't fun. I mean, they just push fishing on everything.
Ingredients for cooking, and fishing. And of course the inventory expeditions, but really it's
I mean,
just cooking
crafting is good, just life skilling is just
well,
bad.
Doesn't even really exist. And the lore reason for that is that, well, you're a hero and you can't be
No, crafting is important, my man.
a merchant or something. You have to obtain lithographs, which are rare scrolls.
I mean, you still have to drop and everything, but like when it comes to arc bosses and leveling them up, all that stuff, heroic trading, all this stuff, I feel like that is kind of crafting too, right? Or maybe it's just upgrading weapons. I mean, crafting could be more important, yes, but
Or recipes that can be used one
I
time
like
to
it.
craft them.
I don't like
These are
crafting being too complicated, in my opinion.
obtained from destroying items that you want to craft. Crafting in Throne and Liberty really just is another vehicle for grinding and just trading. It's a totally bizarre system that's even worse than systems like BDO or, well, SWTOR. These games allowed for stuff to be automated, sure, but at least they did it in a tasteful and roleplay-centric way. So you have this big, beautiful world in TNL, with no points of interest, little mechanics to interact with the world, and no world story or lore to make you care about any of it. Just when things seemingly couldn't get any worse for the game, well, they did. In the same way that AGS mucked up things with their New World launch, they would do the same, crashing their economy with dupes and overabundances of gold. They would do the same here, and repeat the fiasco in November of 2025.
Now that was crazy. He caught it. He caught this. No way. Yeah, that was crazy.
A player reported after a castle siege that they didn't receive rewards they were supposed to have received. AGS would then respond to the customer service request, but would make a fatal error. Instead of just giving the basic currency in the game, aka Solants, they would give the player and guild the premium currency, Lucents, to the tune of over 180 million, which would then create an influx of over 12.9 billion Lucents into the economy, close to like...
Now, credit where credit is due. Even though they didn't remove everything, which I'm sure of, they did ban the players and they did remove most of the stuff out of there. Because again, this is about their money, and when it comes to their money, they're very serious about it. So they did do a good fix, but the rollback would have been way better.
like $215 million in real life. AGS
But a
would
lot
try
of people quit because of that.
to correct things, but the damage was done, removing the lucent from certain players, but would also catch other players in the crosshairs by accident, making matters worse, giving those players negative balance
Yeah, people got like negative balance and stuff. Oh, it was horrible.
when they never even participated directly in any of the fraud. And for those who just simply didn't spend the money that they were given or gained, they were able to keep it, somehow skipping the discovery process. Once again, we have AGS literally ruining the economy of their newly launched virtual world in under 2 months flat, just like they did
AI 100%.
with New World. And that's why I make these videos, guys, and why I get so passionate. Because if I can just make even just a little bit of a difference, that's good enough for me. Because we just had a titan in the space with more money than you can shake a stick at make the same mistake back to back. And they're the only publisher in the West for MMORPGs or online RPGs even making moves right now. It's totally depressing. And to NCSoft, sorry, but it's hard to feel sorry for you guys. You have to do
I mean, I agree. I agree. However, I do want to say that I think if Throne Liberty, I don't think they will, but if they make good changes and they make the new expansion and they actually do follow up, which I don't think they will, I think Throne Liberty has a way to come back. I'm positive about it. I do think it has a way to come back because not any new gen MMOs in the market that are attractive, but I don't think they will do it.
way better research, because you can't say, how could this have happened, when we literally saw it happen before. AGS hadn't improved. They were the same studio just trying to milk and have commercial success without offering anything artistically impressive themselves. A corporate ghoul. But hey, at least they were making some moves, unlike Activision Blizzard and the Blizzard before them, who somehow thought blowing the lead on an industry they dominated simply because they didn't want to try anything other than a 20-plus-year-old game was a good idea. And that's why I tolerate NCSoft so much, besides liking so many of their classic projects.
I mean, NCSoft is the only one delivering MMOs, unfortunately. We see how that went in West.
Of course. At least they are still making some big moves. But after the failure of Throne and Liberty, would they still be willing? Well, kind of. Right? To an extent.
Aeon
But one
2?
thing was for sure, since really the inception of TNL as a project and public thing, that was how little of a focus it seemed to really be for NCSoft. During the course of like 4 trailers from TNL, they would drop 11 trailers for different Lineage projects. That's fine, I get it, it's their moneymaker. But TNL, when you look at NCSoft's coverage of it versus Lineage or any other of their MMORPGs, like for example, the Ion 2 sequel that just launched in Korea.
Oh, Aeon 2. Oh. I mean, we're going to be playing it, but oh my god, it's horrible.
November of 2025. While TNL seemed to get some coverage during the one G-Star convention it showed up to, Ion 2 now, just a year or two later, was front and center. For me, the level of effort was clearly different, and
They're making so much money on Aeon 2. They're going to go all full predatory monetization now. They don't care. Because if it fails in the West, it doesn't matter. It's doing good in the East.
I think I know why. Ion 2 was everything TNL wanted to be. It was playable on both mobile and PC devices seamlessly, able to transition between them even, and boasted the newer and more powerful Unreal Engine 5, and well, it was from a famed IP that already had popularity and success and a good name in Korea. Throne and Liberty was like a Frankenstein project that it was a surprise it even passed the finish line in the first place.
The funny thing is, Throne Liberty is a better game than Aeon. It is a better game. But they don't care, because it doesn't make the money and the hype that Aeon 2. But it is by far a much better game than Aeon 2.
Given its history, led by elite executives that I've never heard of nor seen a public profile for. Whether that was misguided trust or more signs that NCSoft just wanted to get things over with, they didn't really seem proud of their new game. They seem resistant to even doing collaborations with PCbangs, which is kind of the whole thing in Korea. TNL was a strange project. It's a clear desire to go global without first paying attention to if they would impress their own audience at home. And to finish my point about an unknown cast of characters leading things, I think there's zero excuse for this in 2026. If your main developer doesn't have major history working on major titles when working on a major AAA MMORPG, they should have a massive online profile. I should be able to search their name or one of their screen names like you can do with me, and see things about them as a player. Connections, posts, records, you name it. We need to bring back gatekeeping to the virtual world industry. These guys should not be in charge of systems and games' major directions if they don't have a profile. And if they
I love how he showed the background clip, and the guy couldn't get a single kill because of the shields.
never played the games or have a deep
Welcome to TNL balancing.
understanding of them. The weirdest thing is while we expect AGS not to learn from this because they've already showcased that.
I mean, AGS doesn't care. They want to get out of the market. After TNL, they're never going to come back. So this is like their last Hail Mary.
NCSoft seemed to not learn from it either, as New World just had the exact same issue, with an inexperienced executive cast of developers being in charge of a new genre-defining MMORPG they didn't even understand. Now, I don't want to sound doom and gloom, but it's hard not to remember a conversation I had recently with one of the pioneers in the space, Raph Koster, behind Ultima Online, Star Wars Galaxies, and now Stars Reach. And that was concerning how much corporatism seems to keep failing in the MMORPG space. Raph was optimistic about things there when I mentioned it, but also seemed to find my question and point quite interesting and thought-provoking. Sure, corporations can work in the virtual world industry, but it has to be a corporation who understands how the industry works, and how the majority of the money is made, how the sausage is made. And well, that's not initially. It takes time to make money in this industry, and well, we have to find one that won't overexert themselves, since technically one already existed in Sony Online Entertainment. I digress. But NCSoft was seemingly out of touch with Throne and Liberty, and only time would tell if that would be the same for.
Like I said, I don't think they were out of touch. They knew exactly what they were doing, but they were focused on making back the money that they lost in the East.
Their recently launched Ion 2 as well. NCSoft have been resting on their laurels a bit now for a decade, rehashing and remastering their old virtual worlds for mobile devices to massive success, I should add. It's possible their rustiness was also a major factor, and their lack of ability here. Why make a new IP when you can just keep redoing the old ones for zillions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
After the major currency fiasco, the population would drop, probably understandably, to just 13,000 peak players. Now, TNL would receive more updates, weapon balancing, competitive battle.
No. Since December. Wait, that's JT. Lol. Since December, we haven't gotten any content updates except the Tower of Ass, which was ass. So yeah, that's probably why the population is sinking, because we're not getting any content.
Battlegrounds and more to come. But after the currency kerfuffle, it didn't even seem like the hardcore players had faith in AGS or NCSoft anymore. As of now, in January of 2025, TNL has less than 10,000 players playing at peak, and these numbers will likely only continue to drop, and that's just 0.3%.
Yeah, I mean, they did drop and then they came back up again. I think main reason was because Ashes of Creation died and then people came back to the game.
Of that original 3 million players reached in a weak number, and more realistically,
definitely not because of the tower.
0.3% was the only amount of the original population left on Steam. Considering players were wanting core fundamental changes to even considering playing the game again, or just wanting a new game, the likeliness that TNL will make a comeback is pretty minuscule. Hell,
I think they can. I'm gonna be positive. If the new expansion, they do it well, and they actually do follow-up, and they make sure to make the right adjustments and changes to what is required in PP and PvE, they can definitely make a comeback, because again, it is the best MMO, a new gen MMO. But I don't think they will. But if they do, I do have hopes that they will come back for sure.
Not even NCSoft believes that it's going to make a comeback, as they continue to not break out the game's revenue, nor,
I mean, NCSoft only care about Aeon 2, let's be real.
Announce any big changes to come. They also seem to lately have dedicated.
But remember that the NCSoft, Small Gate Studios that works on it, so hopefully they do have enough devs to keep it up, and NCSoft didn't take all of them to the Aeon project.
The majority of their resources, including budget, marketing, and so on and so forth, to their newly launched in Korea MMORPG, Ion 2, which is promised to launch in the West sometime in the second half of 2026. Though no publisher has announced for that yet, so maybe they will self-publish.
They have announced they're coming. NCSoft America.
Published, having learned their lesson. Nope, NCSoft, though, regarding Throne and Liberty, though, has moved on. We haven't seen them post about the game on their YouTube channel in over a year, and TNL, to my knowledge, wasn't even at the recent G-Star event.
That's because Throne and Liberty has become the only market that they're focusing on is the global market, not the Korean market anymore. That's why they haven't posted.
Throne and Liberty, despite a $100 million plus budget, reportedly, and nearly 10 years in development, had failed to captivate an audience just past 2 years, making it rank.
Because AGS and Throne and Liberty themselves, they post every week, right? Every other week, Tico talks and stuff. So, usually the sign you see when an MMO is shutting down is that they stop posting about the game. They don't care, and then the game shuts down. But right now, we're still getting posts, which means that they still have some hope for it. My guess is they're full aiming, going hard for the big expansion. And then after the expansion, we'll see the results.
Amongst some of the major failures on the channel, like King of Meat, New World, and even Crucible, all coincidentally also other Amazon Game Studio failures. The music is playing detectives, but don't worry, I won't beat up on corporate too much, guys. We've reached the end of this mystery. It was a long and twisty case, but I hope you guys were able to pay attention to the clues along the way as they unfolded, so you already have an idea of what's coming next. In the final deduction, where we crack the case for good. Lack of innovation or memorable features. The combat is just a dud.
I agree on this. Not on
Game
this.
plays like a mobile game, but still isn't.
Yes and no. I wouldn't say it plays like a mobile game right now. I mean, it doesn't have super auto features. It's not like Aeon 2 at all. While it does have some features that feels at times mobile-y, like gambly, but it doesn't play like a mobile game for now.
One, large live development mistakes were made.
I agree
Throne and
100%.
Casino, or TNC.
I agree.
Development hell, including a complete change in direction and game style.
This is actually positive that they did a full, complete change in direction, because if they did not, it would have been a mobile game.
A lack of meaning in the world.
Yeah.
NCSoft and their name come with big expectations, and I don't think that that's unreasonable. This is the Activision Blizzard of the East, and then some, because they were actually still making games. But even though they've never been the most successful globally, we still have that expectation for them to come correct, and at least make better games than the ones they've already made before. Throne and Liberty is anything but that. It's an Arcade clone without Jake's song. It's Lineage, but 20 years later. It's Guild Wars 2 of the East, the Temu version. Now, with the length of this video and my exhaustion regarding the recent corporate failures, and, of course, my voice leaving me as it always does, I must bid you detectives farewell. Let me know.
That's a good video. Now, while I agree on many of the takes, there are some things I think is just outdated because he doesn't play the game now, which makes completely sense. I mean, he makes videos on several games, so he cannot keep up to date with most of them. So I do agree with him on some of the concerns. However, I do think the big failure of Throne Liberty, I'll recover in the video, comes from the lack of following up when they make big content changes, bad with balancing, bad with development. But the game itself, a core of the game, I think is pretty good. But it's just been super lackluster. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like and subscribe. Check this video right here, and I'll see you guys next time.